Erev Tov. The calendar today tells us that today was the fifth day of Iyar. And on Jewish calendars, they'll tell you that that is Yom HaAtzmaut, Israel Independence Day. A quick, very brief history. Abraham and Sarah established the presence of our people in the land of Israel. For a couple of hundred years, we left under Jacob when there was a famine. We were enslaved, but it was Joshua who brought us back to the land. And then ultimately, King Saul established a kingdom and a nation, followed by King David. There were times when we were exiled from our land in 586 BCE by the Babylonians, in 70 by the Romans, but there was always a presence of Jews in this land. It was back in the 1880s that the Jewish people began coming back to the land of Israel in waves of immigration called aliyot. And ultimately in November 29th, 1947, the United Nations voted on a partition plan to divide the land between the two peoples who lived there, the Arabs and the Jews. The Jews accepted the plan, and the Arabs said, no way, we want it all. The British said, we're no longer going to be the mediators between these two people. We're out of here on May 15th. When that date came, David Ben-Gurion brought together a group of leaders in Tel Aviv in an art museum that belonged to the former mayor Dizengoff, and he declared the state of Israel. So that date, Friday afternoon, May 15th, 1948, the British left. Israel was declared a state. And at that same moment, Israel was invaded by its neighboring Arab nations. So here we are. It's 72 years since independence. And it's a big deal in Israel, as you might expect. It's also a big deal for us, for Jews all over the world, no matter where we are. It's a reminder of our history. It's a reminder of no matter what happens to us, our roots are in that land, and we also have a refuge if there's ever a need for us to do that. What Cantor Chesler and I would like to present today is a series of songs that really tell a little bit about the history of Israel and also about the spirit of Israel. So the first song is called Eretz, Eretz, Eretz. Land, the word Eretz means land, and this is a love song to the land of Israel, the physical land. Not so much the history, but the geography and the land. It was written in the 1970s by Shaika Paikov. Here's just a few of the words. A land of light blue sky without a cloud. And the sun is to the land like milk and honey. This is the land we were born in. This is the land we will live in. And we will continue living here no matter what happens. A land that we love just like we love our mother and our father. A land of the people, a land forever. A land that we were born in, a land that we will live in, no matter what happens. Eretz, Eretz, Eretz.
Eretz, 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 Eretz שכול ועינב, והשמש לה כדבש וחלב. נחיה, ונשב בה יהיה מה שיהיה. ארץ שנאהב, כי לנו אם ואב, ארץ של העם, ארץ לעולם, ארץ בה נולדנו, ארץ בה נחיה, יהיה מה שיהיה. ארץ, 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 ים אל מול החוף, ופרחים וילדים בלי סוף. בצפון כנרת, בדרום חולות, וממזרח למערב נושק גבולות. ארץ שנאהב, היא לנו אם ואהב, ארץ של העם, ארץ לעולם, ארץ בה נולדנו, ארץ בה נחיה, יהיה מה שיהיה, יהיה מה שיהיה.
Even if you're not a religious person in Israel, there's a very strong connection to the Bible, if not for religious reasons, then for historical reasons. Our next song is called Bahar HaGilboa, on Mount Gilboa. Mount Gilboa is in the north and it overlooks the Jezreel Valley. And this is a song that was written by Leah Neor and Yosef Hadar in 1969. It was performed at the Israel Song Festival in that year. And what it does, it's an Israeli today who goes to the spot of a very tragic but important historical event that took place in Jewish history. The Philistines attacked the Israelites, and King Saul went out to meet them. And unfortunately, at that moment, the Philistines were victorious. And King Saul's son, Jonathan, was killed in battle, and Saul was wounded. And he knew that it was very likely that he would be captured. And if he was captured, he would be tortured and tormented. And he wanted to make sure that he wasn't captured alive. So ultimately, King Saul, in this moment of terrible defeat, takes his sword and falls on it. And sadly, that didn't finish him off. And a local boy who wasn't even Jewish, an Amalekite boy, came by, and Saul asked this foreigner to finish him off, to end his suffering. And so the song tells us the summer was hot and dry on Mount Gilboa. King Saul fell on his spear on Mount Gilboa. Only a foreign boy was with him, only a boy from the Amalekites. It was dry and hot then in the valley during that summer. And then the songwriter imagines, here I am at the very same place. I could almost feel Jewish history happening here in 1969. I'm at the spot where this incredible event happened, and I can feel it. I'm at the very same place. And so many Israeli songs are based on things that happened in our past and how there's a connection today. The valley spreads out at his feet on Mount Gilboa. The summer was then, just as it is before. And there you can see Mount Hermon, far away in the distance. It's as if no years have passed. Bahar HaGilboa.
יבש הקיץ בעיתו, בהר הגלבוע, נשען שבול חניתו, בהר הגלבוע, רק נער גרי פה, רק נער מפני המראה, יבש וחם, יבש וחם, הקיץ בעמק, האדמה צבעה בקיץ בעמק, אולי היה שרה, אולי זו הייתה שעת שקיעה, אולי שקיעת זהב, בו היום באותה השעה נפרס העמק לרגליו בהר הגלבוע, היה הקיץ כמו עכשיו בהר הגלבוע, מנגד התבור בהר החרמון בברכיים, כאילו לא עברו שניים בהר הגלבוע, אותם סלעים בהר הגלבוע, אולי היה שרה, אולי זו הייתה שקיעה, אולי שקיעת זהב, בו היום באותה השעה.
If you've been to Israel, perhaps your tour guide arranged for the bus driver when you first come up into the hills of Jerusalem to stop off at Mount Scopus. And there is a place there that groups, many buses come and all the tourists get off. And from that spot up on Mount Scopus, you're able to look down on the old city of Jerusalem. And you see the walls of the city. And of course, you see the Golden Dome within the old city. And it's a very moving moment for tourists, for pilgrims when they come. Jews have been doing this for not only hundreds of years, probably for thousands of years. One of the ways into Jerusalem was up to Mount Scopus, and then from Scopus down into the actual city itself. There's a classic song about this place, about Har Hatzofim, Mount Scopus. You get the notion of Scopus, telescope, looking down at. In Hebrew, Mount Scopus is called Har Hatzofim, the same idea. Overlook mountain, we might call it. And Jews have been doing this for thousands of years. Well, there was a Jew who was born in Europe, fought in the First World War. He was held prisoner for a number of years. When the war was over and he was released, he said, there's no place for Jews in Europe. I'm going to Palestine. His name was Feuerstein, and one of the things that he did when he came to Israel, to Palestine at the time, is he changed his name from the European Feuerstein, Feuer meaning fire, and he gave himself a more Hebrew name. And he picked the name Ha-Meiri, the one who brings light. So this is a song written in the 1930s by Avigdor Ha-Meiri. It's a beautiful song, and you've probably heard it many, many times. And there are many, many verses, but this is the essence of it. From the summit of Mount Scopus, I will prostrate myself to you. From the summit of Mount Scopus, O Jerusalem, may there be peace unto you. For 100 generations I have dreamt of you, to have the merit and to come to cry, to behold the light of your countenance. And then the chorus is Jerusalem, Yerushalayim, Jerusalem, light, bring light, give light to me, your son. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, if you do that for me, I will build you from what is now just ruins. Here is Yerushalayim, Me'al Piskat Har Hatzofim.
מעל פסקת הר הצופים אשתחווה לך אפיים. מעל פסקת הר הצופים שלום לך ירושלים. מאה דורות חלמתי עלייך לזכות לראות באור פנייך. ירושלים, ירושלים, האירי פנייך לפני. ירושלים, ירושלים, בחורבותייך אבנך.
Israel's not just about wars, and it's not just about the Bible, and it's not just about religion. It's also a place of real people. And so whatever happens in one place in the world eventually will happen in the land of Israel. And so during the 60s, there was a change, just as there was in America, we might say, towards youth culture, towards revolution, all of those things. And one of the great pillars of Israeli music was the singer and actor Arik Einstein. He died a few years ago, and he's really considered the first rock and roll artist in Israel. And he brought that new sensibility to modern Israel. Here's somebody who was secular, and it's not at all about Bible or religion. It's about people trying to deal with war and with peace. So this is a kind of anthem of Israeli secular revolution from the 1960s. Very simple and very beautiful song. Ani v'ata, I and you, nishaneh et ha'olam. We will change the world, you and I, and after we do it, others will follow. Look, it's been said before me, that doesn't matter. You and I will change the world. Ani v'ata.
אני ואתה נשנה את העולם. אני ואתה אז יבואו כבר כולם. אמרו את זה קודם לפניי, לא נשנה. אני ואתה נשנה את העולם. אני ואתה ננסה מהתחלה. נהיה לנו רע, אין דבר זה לא נורא. אמרו את זה קודם לפניי. משנה את העולם. אמרו את זה קודם, לפניי לא משנה. אני ואתה נשנה את העולם.
Next, we have one of the classics of modern Israeli music. It's called Shir HaEmek, Song of the Valley. It was written by one of the great Israeli poets of the 20th century, Natan Alterman. And it was written in the 1930s, and it was part of it was supposed to be the song that would be part of a film that was almost like a propaganda film for Israel. And the idea was, it's based on the notion that here we have a land in the 1930s, we've got Arab marauders who don't want us here. We're involved trying to build the land, the chalutzim, the pioneers who are draining the swamps and who are trying to turn the deserts into fertile areas. And so we have a song, and listen to the words. The weary come to rest and finish their labors. Imagine we have these chalutzim who've been working hard all day. The sun has set. It's time to rest now. Pale night covers the fields of the Jezreel Valley. Jezreel Valley is in the north, and it's often referred to as the breadbasket of Israel. And then the poet says, there's dew beneath my feet, and there is moonlight above my head. From Beit Alpha to Nahalal. These are two of the settlements in the Jezreel Valley. And then the poet goes on and he says, oh, what a night of nights. There is silence over Jezreel. Sleep, dear valley, land of glorious beauty. We will guard you. Anu lecha mishmeret. What this brings to mind is that these original settlers in the 20s and 30s were often attacked by Arab marauders, and the settlers established a group called Hashomer, the Guardians, and they often dressed in keffiyehs, looked like Arabs, and rode horses, and had primitive rifles. And they would beat off the marauders, and they would protect the settlement. And so he tells us, the sea of grain is swaying. The song of the flocks rings out. This is my country and her fields. This is the Jezreel Valley. Bless my country from Beit Alpha to Nahalal. The song then ends on a sort of an ominous note. Mount Gilboa, the same Mount Gilboa we just spoke about. Mount Gilboa is darkened. A horse gallops from shadow to shadow. A voice is carried high over the fields of the Jezreel Valley. Who is shot? Who has fallen between Beit Alpha and Nahalal? So we get a sense here of how dangerous it was for the early chalutzim to be here and how critical it was to protect the land and the people. Shir HaEmek.
במנוחה ליגע ומרקה למר לילה חיוור מסתרע ארץ תולדת ישראל, טל מלמטה ולמעלה מעל, מבית אלפא עד נהלל, דממה לילה מליל, דממה בישראל, נור בעמק ארץ תפארת, אנו לך משמרת. נור בעמק ארץ תפארת, אנו לך משמרת. ים הדגן מתנועע, שיר העדן מצלצל, זוהי ארצי ושדותיה, זהו עמק יזרעאל. תבורך ארצי ותתהלל, מבית אלפא עד נהלל, דממה לילה מליל, דממה בישראל, נור בעמק ארץ תפארת, אנו לך משמרת. נור בעמק ארץ תפארת, אנו לך משמרת.
Israel's greatest songwriter was Naomi Shemer. She was born in a kibbutz up in the north by the Kinneret, and she wrote so many classic songs of Israel from the 50s through the 90s. And we know her perhaps best as the author of Yerushalayim Shel Zahav, Jerusalem of Gold. She also wrote Lu Yehi, Let It Be, the Israeli version of that Beatles song. One of her well-known songs is called Al Kol Eleh, for all of these things. And it's dedicated to her sister, Ruth, and apparently was written when it was discovered that Ruth was suffering from cancer. And so what Naomi attempted to do was not only to write a prayer for her sister, but also to remind her sister that this is how life is, that it comes with the good and the bad. And if you want the good, you need to be willing to accept the bad as well. And so here's what she writes in the prayer part of it, almost a message to God. Over the honey and the sting, over the bitter and the sweet, over a baby daughter, watch over them, my good God. Over the burning fire and the clear water, over the man who returns home from afar. Over all these, watch over them, my good God. Over the honey and the sting, over the bitter and the sweet. So here is Naomi Shemer's song, a prayer for her sister, and a prayer for all the Jewish people to remind us that, yes, life has very bitter things, but we must never forget all the honey and the sweet things that it brings us as well.
על הדבש ועל העוקץ, על המר והמתוק, על ביתנו התינוקת, שמורני הטוב, על האש המבוערת, על המים הזכים, על האיש השב הביתה מן המרחקים, על כל אלה, על כל אלה, שמור נא לי אלי הטוב, על הדבש ועל העוקץ, על המר והמתוק, על נתן נטועה, אל תשכח את התקווה, השיבני והשובה אל הארץ הטובה. שמורני על זה הבית, על הגן, על החומה, יגון מפחד פתע וממלחמה. שמור על המעט שיש לי, על האור ועל הטף, על הפרי שלא הבשיל עוד ושנאסף, על כל אלה, על כל אלה, שמור נא לי אלי הטוב, על הדבש ועל העוקץ, על המר והמתוק, על נתן נטועה, אל תשכח את התקווה, השיבני והשובה אל הארץ הטובה. מרשרש אילן ברוח, מרחוק נושר כוכב, נשאלות ליבי בחושך, נרשמות עכשיו. אנא שמור לי על כל אלה ועל אהובי נפשי, על השקט, על הבכי ועל זה השיר, על כל אלה, על כל אלה, שמור נא לי אלי הטוב, על הדבש ועל העוקץ, על המר והמתוק, על נתן נטועה, אל תשכח את התקווה, השיבני והשובה אל הארץ הטובה.
Sometimes secular songs become prayers, and sometimes prayers become songs. So our next song is actually a prayer that we recite every Shabbos, Tfilah l'Shlom Medinat Yisrael, prayer for the peace of the state of Israel. It was composed by the Israeli chief rabbinate sometime after 1948, and was actually touched up, to make it a little bit more literary by Shai Agnon. Agnon was the Israeli fiction writer who won the Nobel Prize for Literature, I believe in 1966. Two things I want to mention about the prayer. It starts this way: Avinu Shebashamayim, our Father in heaven, Tzur Yisrael v'Goalo, our stronghold, the rock of Israel, and our Redeemer. So first of all, that phrase Tzur Yisrael. We all know, from Ma'oz Tzur, God is a rock. And we find in the book of Deuteronomy, we refer to God often as a rock. In 1948, in May, when they were putting together the Declaration of Independence, this was basically written by a committee and then ultimately edited by David Ben-Gurion. These were people who more or less were avowedly secular. They were anti-religious. They left religion behind. And one of the things that they wanted to make sure of when they put together the document of independence is they didn't want it to be religious at all. To them, religion represented the Europe that they had left, the history of the Jewish people that those who founded Israel were trying to recreate. Well, there were religious people involved in the committee and in the those who took the vote, and those were at the Declaration of Independence. They were very upset. Where is God? God should be in the Declaration of Independence. Imagine this. At this moment, the British are about to leave Palestine. The Arabs are about to invade, and Jews are arguing over, how come you didn't mention God? Unless you put God into the Declaration of Independence, we're not going to sign it. Because after 2,000 years, the only reason we're here, the religious people said, is because of God. And the secular people said, the only reason we're here is because Jews left Europe and drained the swamps and built the land and the city of Tel Aviv and the land of Israel with their own two hands. God had nothing to do with it. And this could have become a major problem that would have torn apart the Jews just at this critical moment. How did they solve the problem? Well, Ben-Gurion, the secularist, was not going to put God into the declaration. And the rabbis and the religious Zionists, they were not going to accept a declaration and a state that didn't have God at its center. So what did they do? They came up with a compromise. And the compromise was they referred to Tzur Yisrael, the rock of Israel. Rock of Israel to religious people meant one thing and one thing only. It meant God. To the secularists, Rock of Israel means the strength of our people who came and who sacrificed and who worked and who were willing to give of their lives to build the land. So both sides were happy. God is not in the declaration, or he is, depending on how you identify and define Rock of Israel. The second interesting thing about the prayer is that it goes on and it says, Barech, bless the state of Israel, and then three critical words, Reshit Tzmichat Geulatenu, which means the beginning of the flowering of our redemption. And here we have another great debate and argument between Jews. To religious Jews, to religious Zionists, Israel is not just another state. This is something very different and very special. To religious Zionists, we're only here because after 2,000 years of exile, God has brought us back and God has shined his face upon our endeavor. And this, the creation of the state of Israel after 2,000 years of exile, after the Holocaust, the state of Israel is the beginning of the Messianic era. This is the first step in the ultimate coming of the Messiah. Well, there are a lot of Jews, especially secular Jews, who said that's got nothing to do with it. And the Messiah isn't coming. There is no Messiah. We don't expect him. And to think that this state, was created by God, it was created by people who came back and who built it. And so, again, this phrase, what does it mean when we say the founding of the state in 48 will be the beginning of the flowering, the flourishing of our redemption? Well, the secularists felt we want a state like everybody else in the world. The religious Zionists said we want a state that's different, that comes from God, and that the Messiah will ultimately come to. So there are those who take exception to these three words, the beginning of the flourishing of the redemption, of our redemption. It's got nothing to do with the Messiah. It's us. Whatever redemption we have, it's what we bring ourselves with our own two hands. So you see coded in these words are ideas and phrases and theologies and philosophies that are often jarring one to the other, but somehow we Jews manage to live. You probably, if you've been to a Shabbat service, you know this song. Please see it now, not just as a song, but as our prayer on Independence Day, celebrating 72 years, hoping that we will continue on and that ultimately we will have peace. The final words of the prayer say, "Strengthen the hands of those who defend our holy land. Bless the land with peace and its inhabitants with lasting joy." Avinu Shabashaman.
Avinu, Avinu, שבשמיים, צור ישראל בגואלו. אבינו, אבינו, שבשמיים, צור ישראל בגואלו. ברך, ברך את מדינת ישראל, ושהיא צמיחת גאולתנו. מגן עליך בפרט חסדך, ופרוס עליך סוכת שלום לך. אבינו, אבינו, שבשמיים, צור ישראל בגואלו. אבינו שבשמיים, צור ישראל בגואלו. שלח אורך איתך, וראשיה שריה ויועציה ותקנן בעצה טובה. לפניך צור ישראל וגואלו אבינו שבשמיים צור ישראל וגואלו.
Finally, we want to end with Hatikva, and there's a fascinating story about it. Hatikva was written in 1886 by Naftali Herz Imber. And the occasion, he wrote a poem, I believe it has 8 different stanzas. And it tells the history of the Jewish people looking towards their land and ultimately returning to their land over the course of years of exile and persecution. The occasion for this poem, he was commissioned to write this poem when the settlement Petach Tikva was founded, and again, around 1885-86. Petach Tikva literally means Petach, the opening, and Tikva is hope. So the settlement was thought to be the beginning, the opening of the hope of the Jewish people to return. This was in the 1880s, the beginning of the movement of the return of Jews to the land of Israel. And so you have this, one of the first settlements, Petach Tikva. And actually the poem was originally called Tikvatenu, Our Hope. And it was specifically about this building, founding, establishing of this very first agricultural settlement, today a major city in Israel, not too far from Tel Aviv. The tune, very beautiful, haunting tune. I don't know if you're aware of this, but if you're into classical music, there's a Smetana has a piece called the Moldau. And it's clear that Hatikva, the tune for Hatikva, which was ultimately put together by a man named Samuel Cohen, what he did is he took the Moldau, one of the motifs of Smetana's classical piece about the river, the Moldau, and he used it to create a tune for Imber's poem, Tikvatenu. The words go like this. It's really one long sentence. As long as the heart of the Jew beats, as long as the eye of the Jew looks eastward, then our 2,000-year-old dream is not lost. To be a free people in our land, the land of Zion and Jerusalem. I got to tell you that for everything that Jews do, there's always a controversy. And there is indeed a controversy in Israel about Hatikva. You might not know it, but at least 71% of the population of Israel is Jewish. That means that there's about 20 to 25% who are Arabs. Now, these are not the Palestinians. These are Israeli citizens who happen to be Arab. And yet, the flag of the land of Israel, the flag of their country, has a Jewish star on it. The national anthem of their country is all about the hope of the Jewish people. So there are Arabs who, of course, will refuse to, Arab citizens of Israel, who are very upset that this is their national anthem. They see Israel as the state of all its citizens, not as the Jewish state. And this becomes a matter of great controversy. There are some Jews who say, tough, they can go someplace else. There's 22 Arab states in the world. This is the only state that the Jews have. Okay? And Arabs are able to rise. They could be members, they are members of the Supreme Court in Israel. And in fact, a couple of years ago, the Arab member of the Israeli Supreme Court at a public ritual stood in respect but didn't sing Hatikva. And some people in the country were very upset. How could somebody do that, not sing his own national anthem? And other people said, well, what do you expect him to sing about the hope of the Jewish people? That doesn't make any sense. At least he stood, he was respectful, he didn't make a big deal out of it. So that becomes a controversy. There are those that say maybe we should change the national anthem. It shouldn't be Hatikva. It should be something that everybody could sing. A lot of people thought that Israel's national anthem should have been Yerushalayim Shel Zahav. Right? It's about Jerusalem. Jerusalem is holy to Jews and Arabs and Christians. So that is, again, something that people talk about and fight about, both Jews with each other and the non-Jewish citizens of the state. So we end our little program today with Israel's national anthem, and it does bring to mind 2,000 years of our dreaming about next year in Jerusalem and coming back. And ultimately, it's a song about hope in the future. Sing with us, Hatikva.
Kolod balevav venima nefesh Yehudi onia v'fatei Yisrael kadima ayin letzion Sophia.
Thank you to Cantor Chesler for leading us tonight. We're going to break for just a few minutes. 8:30, we will continue with Mari.